Hi, I'm John and welcome to Lucky Losers, the channel with content for all. Over the past few months I've been focusing on Swindon transport's history, namely buses. As you may know, Swindon has always been associated with the railways and its legendary railway works. There'll be videos about that in the future. However, maybe you don't know it, but Swindon has also a deep association with aviation, with a very long history stretching back around about 110 years. And that's why I've decided to put together a series of a few videos, for perhaps more, which will focus on its aviation history. The first part is about its beginning, together with the pre and post-war events. The second in May will be about the nearby RAF and US Air Force bases and the Concorde history, and the final parts will focus on events in the not too distant past associated with Swindon. So without further ado, let's take a look at the pre and post-war histories. The first aeroplane to visit Swindon arrived on the 27th of July 1912 and attracted a crowd of 35,000 amazed onlookers. It was a Blériot monoplane that was demonstrated. It is believed that this aircraft was flown in by Herbert Bates, a local person, and that the landing field was on or near the polo ground off Marlborough Road. Few of those could have imagined that, just a generation later, Swindon folk would find themselves building, modifying, testing, repairing and servicing planes of all shapes and sizes as part of an industry which would help to shape history. One locally built plane would even go on to briefly reclaim the aerial world speed record. Swindon and its neighbouring villages was the hub of a hastily assembled aircraft industry spread over a number of sites, which appeared as if by magic during the Second World War, before disappearing, although not quite as quickly, to leave only a few signposts to a remarkable period in the town's history. But it's a chapter from Swindon's story which deserves comparison with aircraft manufacture in the area was first mooted in 1936, when the Air Ministry, with one eye on Germany's rearmament, started to make plans for shadow sites which would provide backup to the country's leading aircraft factories should they be attacked, and even substitute for them if they were put out of action. By 1938, with war seemingly inevitable, South Marston was chosen as a shadow site because of its good communication links, but mostly because it was so close to the large skilled workforce of Swindon's huge GWR factory. With the first planes to be built at South Marston due to be made from wood, the skills of craftsmen from the carriage and wagon shops were to prove vital. Many of the workers arrived via the Swindon and Highworth Light Railway. This was originally built to take railway employees from the Highworth area to Swindon, but a specially built new branch to South Marston meant that some of these workers would now be going in the opposite direction. Building work on the factory at South Marston began in January 1940, but a hasty change of plan was ordered by government officials when they saw the size of the building that was taking shape. They felt that it presented too big a target to enemy bombers, so units were set up at Sevenhampton and Blunsdon instead. The South Marston factory was ready by the summer of 1940, just as the RAF was about to fight and win the Battle of Britain. First, on August the 14th, 4 bombs landed harmlessly near Wroughton airfield. Then the following day there were 9 more at Stratton, which only succeeded in frightening cattle and creating a few craters in fields. 9 days later, around a dozen bombs landed in allotments in Shrivingham Road and on the county ground cricket pitch, followed by 50 incendiary bombs at Highworth on September the 26th, which fell on stubble fields and, according to reports, produced the first-class firework display. Then, on October the 1st, a single bomb fell in the fields at Cote, killing a cow. None of these raids caused human casualties, but that would change dramatically on the night of October the 20th, when a chilling prophecy about Swindon's role in the Second World War looked like it was about to come true. This had been predicted. Swindon wasn't targeted again until December the 19th, when a raid by a lone bomber caused 1 death in Beatrice Street, but Ipswich Street, which was also hit, escaped with no casualties. If it looked like the onset of Swindon's own version of the Blitz, however, we now know that it was not to be, and although the town had worse to come, it was already clear that, compared with other towns and cities, it was getting off lightly. No one has fully explained why this should be so when the town presented not only a strategic target because of its massive railway works, one of the biggest industrial complexes in the world, but also one that was easy to spot amid the Wiltshire countryside. It was easily within range. Indeed, bombers must have passed over Swindon on their way to wreaking terrible bombardment of Bath and Bristol. Key aircraft manufacturing facilities at South Marston and Sevenhampton and the airfield at Wroughton were still more reasons for the Luftwaffe to have our area high on its list of targets. This time it was high summer, and 3 separate attacks raised the death toll from 11 to 48. The first attack was potentially the most lethal, but once again Swindon was lucky, as the first significant raid on the railway works, which also turned out to be the last, failed. In broad daylight at 6:30 a.m. on July the 27th, 1942, the plane swooped low over the town, and people standing in a bus queue dived for cover as it bombed and machine-gunned the factory's own gasworks. But 3 weeks later, on August the 17th, 1942, came the worst night of bombing the town would ever see. 2 separate incidents caused 19 deaths in Ferndale Road and another 10 in Kembury Street. 4 people were killed at 475 Ferndale Road, but there were also deaths at other homes too. In Kembury Street, occupants were killed at numbers 6, 10, 11 and 12. Among the dead that night were a mother and her tiny child, who was still clasped in her breast, and it took several days to remove some of the bodies in Ferndale Road. There were further attacks, though those resulted in few casualties. The town saw out the last 3 years of the war peacefully, and its huge works and its remaining houses mercifully and still inextricably untouched by the conflict. The first attack was potentially the most lethal, but once again Swindon was lucky, as the first South Marston master had rolled off the production line at South Marston in the spring of 1941, and a year later the factory was turning out nearly 80 a month. At the same time as masters were being produced at South Marston, the area also found itself helping with the manufacture of other aircraft. Men at Swindon's giant railway works machined 171,000 components and carried out some timber airframe refurbishment for Hawker's Hurricanes, while marine mountings at Wroughton and Plessey in Swindon were also involved in producing components for the war effort. The area was also about to put together whole bombers. In August 1940, the Short Brothers Limited factory at Rochester was bombed and put out of action, and when the Belfast factory was also attacked, the Ministry of Aircraft Production, MAP, switched much of the short Stirling manufacturing to the Swindon area. Fuselages were built at Blonsden and fitted out at Sevenhampton, while parts, including wings, were also manufactured in number 24 shop in Swindon Railway Works and at a garage in the town centre. These parts were all taken to South Marston, which also produced some of the wings for assembly in a new purpose-built factory called FS2. Take-off and landing facilities were also needed for the 4-engine Stirling, so 2 1,000-yard concrete runways were constructed close to the FS2 site. The first Stirling took off for delivery to the RAF at the beginning of 1942, and soon the factory was completing 16 a month. Between the autumn of 1942 and spring of 1943, however, production of both the Master and the Stirling was wound down. The intention was to produce Lancaster bombers instead, but plans were shelved as the factory prepared to play host to the world's most celebrated military aircraft. If you've managed to get this far into the video, well done, thumbs up to you. Well, statistics show that probably you're not one of my subscribers. Thank you if you are, of course. I am grateful for every one subscriber that I have. In order to get a notification of future videos that I make, and they do come out at least twice a week, subscribe and press on the bell to get notifications. And I want my channel to grow, but without your support that won't happen. So thank you very much once again, and enjoy the rest of this video. Cheers. First, the factory undertook modification work on US aircraft, but demand for the new generation of Spitfires, the Mark 21, became so great that South Marston turned all of its production facilities over to these most famous of fighters. Much of the workforce received hasty retraining in metalwork, and as a result, first of all, the factory only carried out modifications on older Spitfires before the first South Marston built Mark 21 was delivered to the RAF just before Christmas 1943. South Marston's role in the Spitfire story, however, was short-lived. The new Spitfire was a high-altitude fighter and, especially with D-Day on the horizon in the summer of 1944, the situation had moved on. In the end, only 121 Mark 21s were built at South Marston, although another 50 modified Spitfires bound for naval action, which the Royal Navy called Seafires, were also made there. Production of later versions of the Spitfire also continued after the war, before South Marston's last Spitfire, actually a Seafire, was completed in January 1949. In October 1945, Vickers bought the factory and airfield from MAP. It cost them £500,000, and the factory's new roles included the modification of planes which had survived the wars in trainers. First, the factory undertook modification work on US aircraft, but demand for the new generation of Spitfires, the Mark 21, became so great that South Marston turned all of its production facilities over to these most famous of fighters. Much of the workforce received hasty retraining in metalwork, and as a result, first of all, the factory only carried out modifications on older Spitfires before the first South Marston built Mark 21 was delivered to the RAF just before Christmas 1943. South Marston's role in the Spitfire story, however, was short-lived. The new Spitfire was a high-altitude fighter and, especially with D-Day on the horizon in the summer of 1944, the situation had moved on. In the end, Spitfires also continued to fly out of South Marston after repairs and modifications, with most of these ending up in foreign air forces. Walrus and Sea Otter amphibians were also refurbished, the former destined to fly the colours of the Netherlands and Argentinian air forces, and the latter for civil duties. By the 1950s, the South Marston factory was part of the Vickers Armstrong Aircraft Limited Supermarine Division. Still, the spirit of the Spitfire was proving persistent as production turned to the Attacker, a jet version of the Spitfire, which in turn had evolved from the Spitfire. The Attacker was the Royal Navy's first jet fighter, designed for launching from aircraft carriers, and was also used by the Royal Pakistan Air Force. In all, 182 Attackers were built at South Marston between 1950 and 1953. Did you know that Swindon-built submarine Swift broke the world speed record? The submarine Swift was an RAF fighter that had evolved from the Attacker. The Swift was a single-seat swept-wing fighter powered by a Rolls-Royce Avon axial flow turbojet engine. This aircraft was destined for the record books when a South Marston-built Swift F4 WK198 set the world speed record at 736 miles per hour, 32 miles per hour short of being the first supersonic aircraft over Libya on September the 25th, 1953, a record it held for just 8 days. This was the second time that a vehicle made in the Swindon area had held the record, the GWR locomotive City of Truro having set it at 102.3 miles per hour in 1904. In all, 197 Swifts were manufactured, all of them at South Marston. The factory also produced scimitar jets for the Royal Navy, and it was to be the Scimitar that would be the final complete aircraft built on the site in January 1961. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, South Marston produced components for a wide range of other Vickers products and major projects such as Concorde, but that will be a story for next time. So there you have it, remarkable piece of history that, as I've already said, some of you may not have been aware of. So next month is the turn of the Concorde story and the history of two nearby Air Force bases, one in the past that's no longer and one that's still present. So that's all for now in this series of Swindon in the Air. I hope you've enjoyed it, and of course don't forget your comments and all the other YouTube stuff, including subscribing. This channel is growing rapidly, so hope you can get on the bandwagon. See you again in May. Thanks a lot. Cheers.